So MDI, SDI environments. SDI environments are single, I forget exactly what it means, something to the effect of single display interface versus a multi-display interface. The idea is when we build applications that are single windows that kind of work intercollectively, we have a window and then we pop up a dialog window or we launch a second form and they all kind of just float around on the screen together. Those are SDI environments where each form basically is functioning independently, but it runs within the overall application process. MDI environments, you probably are most familiar with them in applications like Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, Visual Studio. Those are MDI environments. So what makes them MDI environments? The fact that you can have toolbars, dialog boxes floating around the screen, as well as the ability to have multiple windows that all reside inside of a master or parent window. So having these kind of nested window environments where everything is all kind of contained inside of one giant window, and then inside of that one giant window are all these little tiny child windows. So you don't have forms floating all over the desktop. They're all kind of consolidated and kept together. That's the concept I want to show you tonight. That concept will probably take me all of 15 minutes to show you. It's not that complex. It's just a matter of knowing what properties to set, what properties to use, and how to make all the pieces kind of fit and work together. The other piece that I'm going to talk about tonight is chapters 25, and I'm going to cover it in very high-level detail. I'm not going to go into all the intricacies. If you're interested, they are in the textbook. But I'm going to introduce you to the three deployment methods. You have Xcopy, click once, and then you can actually do an install shield deployment, which is the most traditional way of, here's the setup file, run this setup, and it'll install your program. You can do all three of those within Visual Studio. And I'll talk about the pros and cons of each, the good and bad, and then I'm going to at least get you to understand how do I get to that point of doing a once-click install shield or just a basic Xcopy. Okay? So all of that should probably take me about an hour and 15 minutes. So hopefully we should be done by 7:15, 7:30 at the latest. Depending on how long it's taken me to get to that, I'll probably stop around 7 or quarter till 7. We'll still take our normal break, and then we'll jump back into it. So we'll see where we get. All right. So doing MDIs is ridiculously simple. You have a form, any form basically, and you set a property is MDI container. You set it to true. Now I recommend only doing this to one form. You could do it to more than one if you have the right reasoning, but in a normal application you have one form and you set it as your MDI container. So you look for the property is MDI container and you set it to true. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to rename form 1 in my project and I'm going to call it parent. Visual Studio will say, you're renaming a file. Do you want me to rename the rest of it? And I'll say yes. So this form is now our container. So we'll just say this is the CP Week 11 app. My start position, I'm going to set it at center screen, and I want it to maximize box true, minimize box true. Where's the default size? Windows state maximized. So what does that mean? Run the program. it will launch my MDI full screen. I want this container to be a full screen window. Because what are we going to do inside of it? We're going to drop forms or open forms inside of this window. So what kind of application are we going to build? We'll go through and just do a real simplistic one that incorporates let's see, what can we do? We'll just do something like a real simple store application. Okay. So first thing that I'll do is I'll go into my toolbox. We'll add a menu strip. So file. If you remember, if you use the ampersand in front of the letter, it makes it a hotkey. And then this will be our exit. We'll say inventory, sales, help. Say add item. Edit item, manage all. All right. New invoice, new quote, new purchase order. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create 3 forms. One that manages inventory, one for new invoices, and I think that should be sufficient for the example. So I'm going to add a new Windows form, and I'll call it inventory. I'll add a second form. I'll call it invoice. And I'm just going to leave them as they are. I'm not going to get into too much nitty-gritty with them. So if we're going to do an add item, let's get these out of the way. So we've done this work in the past. So you pop up a new form. So you say inventory new form equals new inventory, right? And then we say new form dot show. If we run this inventory add item, we get our little inventory window. Thanks, Windows 8. But our forms are independent. So this is still kind of an SDI application. They're not connected. If we mouse over this, we see both forms independently. We can then actually click on this and minimize it, but it minimizes into the task tray instead of minimizing into the window space, the MDI space. So we want to be able to attach or associate these. So before we launch show, we say new form dot MDI parent. And what we're doing is we're setting the parent of this form. So the MDI form, the parent form, it's funny I use that term, right? Is launching a child form. It's creating an instance of that form, and then it's going to launch it. It's going to show it. But before we show it, we want to say, by the way, this form is owned by me, the parent form. So the new form, and then the MDI parent of that new form is this. And the reason it is this is because this is referring to parent, the parent form. So the keyword this always refers to the class itself. So this refers to the active parent form, the MDI form. So now if we launch inventory add item, still launches the window, just the same. still drag it around, but it now lives inside of our MDI container. If I take this out of full screen, or out of maximize mode, there's our window, but he's stuck inside of there. I can maximize it, so now it's maximized inside of the MDI. If this was Word, then that would be our page. We can manipulate and add and do whatever we wanted to do. We can treat it as a child window and actually float it around. We can minimize it and it docks into the bottom of the MDI window. So everything is now contained inside of this MDI container. If we mouse down here, we only have one app running. We don't have all these different windows that are all hanging out together. If we minimize, everything gets minimized all at once. So we now have this contained shell of an application. So sales, new invoice. We'll say invoice, new invoice form equals new invoice. New invoice form dot MDI parent equals this. Again, referring to that parent form, because all of these event handlers are written inside of the parent form class. And then we say new invoice form dot show. Launch again. There's the inventory. And there's the invoice. So these kind of run mutually exclusive to one another, but they're both inside of the MDI space. I can maximize one, and it maximizes them all. I can control tab, and if you look up at the address bar, you'll see where it says inventory. Now it says invoice. So I'm actually toggling between those two windows. We can add to our menu bar window, and we can do cascade, horizontal tile, vertical tile. So how do we facilitate this? Part of it being an MDI form, there's a method called layout MDI. And then you pass it an MDI layout enum, which is arrange icons cascade, tile horizontal, or tile vertically. So this one is our cascade, so we'll call cascade. Call the layout MDI method, which is the method of the parent form again. And we'll say MDI layout dot tile horizontal, layout MDI, MDI layout, tile vertical. So we'll load inventory, load invoice. We can actually launch multiples of these if we wanted, because we're just creating a new instance every time. Let's say cascade. Tile horizontally. Oh, let me cascade again. Tile vertically. So it's using the same algorithm, so it's all coming out the same. But we could launch a new one, invoice, and say tile vertically, and it'll make adjustments. The arrangement that it's doing, I did not program it. Keywords that brings them. Yes. Yes. So if we go back to the code, I have these three menu item clicks calling layout MDI method and passing in tile vertical, tile horizontal, cascade off of the MDI layout enum. That's what's triggering that layout.
These are the words, therefore you can replace the words with something else. So these are
These are the words. These are part of the framework, but not necessarily.
So you need to use this.
Yes, because they are part of this enum. I'm just using the same words or similar words from the UI so that there's consistency. I mean, those are common terms. So, you know, you go into Visual Studio, you drop down, you have new horizontal tab group, new vertical tab group. No, they don't have Cascade, but, you know, older apps had the Cascade option. So, conventions are conventions for a reason. This is one of the things I always say as a programmer. So, you know, you want to make your program as easy to use as possible, so you want to be as consistent as possible with other applications. People always assume, or they should, that under the edit menu they will find what? Undo, copy, cut, paste. If I go to edit and all I find is save, that bunks convention to me. If I go under file, I want to be able to find new, open, save, exit at minimum. So don't start putting it under help. You know, those kinds of ideas. So these conventions are conventions for a reason. Okay, so this doesn't change the way forms work and the way the forms interact. Yes?
Is there any way to set it so that the forms can't overlap each other? So that, let's say you open a new inventory and a new invoice, that when they open, they're next to each other rather than one on top of the other?
That's a good question. I think aside from probably actually doing the calculation to open them side by side, there's no like simple setting to make that happen. So you would have to do a detection and then manage that detection. So one thing that's there that I kind of just glossed over. So we're going through and we're creating a new form. We're saying this is the parent, and then we show the form. If we go back to this dot, there is an MDI children property off of the parent, and actually off of every form. But that provides for you an array of all the active forms that are owned by the MDI. So if you wanted, you could iterate through that, see if there is an inventory form currently in the collection. You could do some logic like, if there's an inventory form, don't launch another one. Bring that one to focus instead. Or you could detect, is there an inventory one? No. So you'll want to show it. And then you can also say, is there an invoice one? If there is, you know, force some sort of layout adjustment so that they come up side by side. Does that make sense? Okay. So what I was going to say is the interaction between the forms does not change. What you actually gain by doing this with the parent, with the MDI, is that you now have a centralized like parent form that can kind of be your traffic cop between your children forms. So before, we would kind of facilitate doing that with a master form. So that master form was the first form that launched, and then we were doing, you know, our midterm project of adding a doctor and adding prescriptions and all of that stuff. You would have kind of this master form, and then you would launch these child forms off of it. Your dialogues, you do show dialogue. And then that master form would kind of act as the traffic cop. So the child, you would call a method, the child form would launch as a dialogue box, you would do some action, and then we would capture that dialogue event, and then we'd have a public property, and we'd pull a value out of that child form and store it somewhere. Same concept can still be done here with the MDI. What you gain is that the MDI then has control over all the forms and is interacting and dealing with all those forms together. So when you drop down and say add inventory, that add inventory then triggers, okay, there's this form here now. You then, once the form closes, you then can capture that and then move forward and continue to do things. when you do a show dialog, you actually get an exception. You get the exception because dialog boxes, by design, are designed to be top-level forms. They want to take control over the entire space. They want to be on top. They want to be the only thing that can be interacted with. Within an MDI, you cannot set a form as an MDI child and then say, make it a dialog box, because it kind of bunks the whole concept of this form coexists with these other forms. It wants to take control, so it actually throws you an exception. And the exception says, the form is not a top-level form and cannot be displayed as a modal dialog box. Remove the form from any parent form before calling show dialog. So that's just something to keep in mind. In the past, what we've done is we've always used dialog boxes to facilitate what we're doing. Using an MDI layout, you can't use those dialog boxes because everybody kind of coexists together. So what you may be wondering is, okay, so before what we would do is we would say add doctor. You drop it down, you say add doctor, and you would do a dialog box and prompt for that user to add the doctor. Upon prompting, it locks the event, the click event, this click event that says show dialog, it locks there. And it goes off and it launches that dialog form. You do some stuff inside of the dialog form, and then once you hit OK, it then comes back to here and it continues to execute. When you call show, unlike show dialog, you're actually executing what's referred to as an asynchronous process. You say, show the box, and it goes, okay, and then it walks away. So for example, if I come in here, let me turn this back to show. Let me do it this way first. So let me comment this out. And then I'll do message box.show. Dialog box closed. So the idea here is create a form, show it. It's not an NDI association, it's independent. Show it as a dialog box. Once the box is closed, I want to say dialog box closed. So if I run inventory add, I do my thing with this form, blah, 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 blah. Fill it out, hit OK. Dialog box closed. The reason for that, and the reason it flows the way it does, is because if I put a breakpoint here and a breakpoint here, run it again, or I'm sorry, launch it again, we hit new form.show dialog. It prompts the new box, and that thread stops executing. It actually waits. And it waits until this window is closed. Once the window closes, it moves on to the next line of code and it executes, which gives us the message box. So I'm going to turn this into, stop debug. Turn this into a child form. I can't do show dialog, I just have to call show. Otherwise I get the exception. And I run again. Immediately, I get that pop. I get that message box showing. I didn't close the form yet. But the form is now running out of process of the MDI map. So it calls the box, it says, okay, box is launched, spins it off, and then it goes on to the next line of code, which is dialog box closed. So what do we want? What is our goal here? We want to know when the box closes. Because at the point at which the box closes, we know that there's a high likelihood that we should act in some way. Maybe we want to capture that inventory item that was added and store it in the database. Or maybe we want to cause a process. You close the inventory box, and now an email is sent to receiving. I don't know. Something like that. The way you can do that, you stop debugging. You can say new form dot. And you know how we wire up these event handlers all the time? We go in, we double click, and it creates a method. You can also do it in code at runtime. So by saying new form dot, we have access to all these properties, but all these little guys with lightning bolts, they're also, those are events. And there's form close events. Now there's form closing and form closed. The difference is, before the form closes, this event is fired. Form closing. When the form is closed, it's already disappeared from the screen, this event fires. Is there a real difference? That's up to you to decide. You decide when you want to handle the event. In my case, I want to handle the event when it's closed, because I want to have that message box pop up. All right? So how do you wire up into this event at runtime? So it's new form dot form closed. That's the event. The syntax is plus equals. The reason it's plus equals is that what you're doing is you're adding a method to be called when the event fires. So just like when you have, int I equals 0, and then you say int I plus equals 1, you want to take the value of I, 0, and add 1 to it. Then you do plus equals 1 again, and then you're taking I, which is now 1, and adding another 1 to it. So it's the equivalent of doing I equals I plus 1. Same idea. We're taking whatever event handlers are currently wired up, and we're adding another method to be called when the event fires. Now, this is so common that Visual Studio helps you. It says, oh, okay, new form, form closed. So you're going to create an event. You're going to handle this event when it happens. So at the moment you do plus equal next to event, it says, oh, do you want me to create new form underscore form closed? The same events method signature that we get every time we double click on something to say go ahead and create a click event for that. It uses the same syntax. And then it says, okay, I've now created this kind of template or this holder, and it says press tab to generate the handler for this class. So it is assuming that this is going to be a method. It's going to exist. It's detecting that the method doesn't exist, and it's saying if you push tab again, I'll go ahead and create an event handler for you. So now when this event for this new form happens, this method gets called. And what do I want it to do when it gets called? Show that message. So let's run it again. Inventory, add item. So it's going to say new form.show. It then goes ahead and launches the next line, which is new form.form closed. Wire up this event. New form closed. If I mouse over that and I hit F12, it's going to jump me into that method, that function that was just created. So now the form is here. It's inside the MDI. It's locked in there. I'm going to close it. Upon close, it kicks off form closed. The form itself, the new form, kicks off the form closed event because we closed the window, because we closed the form. That kickoff, the mechanics are, okay, you close that form. There's a series of methods that may be wired up into that event. Go ahead and run them all. Call them all in sequence. Now the sequence isn't always guaranteed. They'll tell you that in the documentation. Every method will get called, but it may not get called in the order you think. It will just call every method, so that's something to keep in mind. But it calls new form underscore form closed, which will then prompt for our dialog box. Fancy. So what value does that give you?
You just say, do you want to close the form? And yes. Would it be more clear?
You could. I mean, it depends on the flow of your application and what you're trying to accomplish.
Because that's kind of ambiguous.
Yeah. I'm trying to show you the process. I'm not trying to show you how to code it for your scenario. So you're saying, so what I'm getting at is this. So let's go concrete. Alright, so what does this do? We have two boxes, price and name. Those boxes are now to create a new item. So we have a new inventory item class. It has two properties, name and price. Inside of this, we have a decimal. We attempt to parse the decimal from the text. If it's successful, we then create a new item with the text name and the decimal price. We store that in the property of this inventory form in a public property called saved item. If the parse fails, we have a message box that says invalid price, and then we just return back to the inventory form. We could go as far as saying and string is null or white space txt name dot text. F12 public. So inconsistent accessibility. This form is public, this property is public, this class was not set as public. So inventory item, name, widget, $29.95. If I forget the name, I get the warning. If I put a bad price, I get the warning. Together, it works. Now, what could we do with that? What can we do with what we have here? So we're adding a new inventory item. You have two choices. Create another class. Oops, it's not at all what I wanted. Inventory item repository. Public static. So this acts as the storage place for inventory items. So that could be a database, that could be a text file, that could be whatever we want it to be. For me, for right now, it's just going to be this list. So prop, lists, inventory item, items. Return items. Constructor items equals new that. Public void add item inventory item items dot add item. So within the inventory form, we could simply go in and we get down here, we have the saved item. We could then call out inventory item repository. Oh wait, I didn't make those static. So this is a static constructor. This is a static private field, static public field, static method, static method. So I made the class static. A static class means that everything inside of it must be static. So that's the given of all this. The reason I made all of the properties and methods static is I don't want to have to create an instance of the inventory item repository. I just want to be able to call that class and do inventory item repository dot add dot remove dot items. if I didn't make it static or didn't make the methods and properties static, I'd have to say inventory item repository repo equals new inventory item repository. That being said, it would probably make more sense to actually not make it a static. Because, well, it'll get into a whole other thing. So that's why I made it static. So then from here I can just say dot, and then I get all my methods and properties. I didn't have to create a variable for it.
Static just replaces that then, essentially?
Static says project it out and make it available without creating an instance. So it kind of lives in this shared memory space. So the compiler implicitly creates an instance, and then everything there, all the properties and stuff that are static as well, they just kind of get this memory space that's carved out for them automatically.
How are you going to say that you shouldn't have
What I was going to cover next week in more detail was this idea of creating interfaces. So what we could have done is we could have created an interface for inventory item repository. So what is an interface? An interface is basically a blueprint. It says whenever you create an instance of a class, this class has to follow that blueprint. So we could create a blueprint for our inventory item repository, and then we could create different classes that implement that in different ways. We could create one that does this, where it just has a list in memory, temporary. We could create one that adds and removes from a database. So when you call add, you pass it the object, it takes it, packs it away into an insert statement, and puts it in the database. We could create an instance of it that stores it to a text file, does comma-separated values. We could do an instance that passes it off to a web service and stores it somewhere in the cloud. By creating that interface and by making it an instance, you then can create different instances of the inventory item repository that have different pieces of functionality. A SQL instance, a memory instance, a web service instance, whatever you wanted. So doing this is actually a very short-sighted approach. You get a lot more flexibility when you start doing the instances and the interfaces, and you actually treat everything as an interface, like we did a little bit in the ADONet stuff. So for this example, it's not worth the investment, but that would be the reasoning. So we can say add item, saved item, and call close. So, kind of to your point, Adam, why not do it all in here, done with it kind of a thing, and prompt, are you sure you want to save? In this flow, it doesn't make sense to prompt them, are you sure you want to save? They click save, they want to save. If they hit the X, then you would want to capture that internally and say, well, time out, you're trying to close. Upon form closing, you want to handle that event, and say, hey, I noticed you're trying to close this box, do you really want to? Yes, no. Because they're clicking save, in this case, we would just handle it. And we can actually, this idea of separation of concerns is, do you really want the MDI to be handling this step of the save? You want to put that responsibility on the MDI to manage every time a form closes, it needs to do the cleanup. It needs to capture that data and do what it needs to do. Or do you want the form itself that's supposed to know the most about that data type, inventory item, do the final cleanup steps? Okay. So in this case, it goes ahead and calls add item to the repository and passes the new item. And then we can close the form. So from here, this is irrelevant. That form closed, we don't need it. If I go in here and just add a breakpoint, I can go to my watch You can say inventory item repository dot items. There is one item in the repository. That item is my widget for $29.95. So now that it's in a centralized place, any other form could access it. Trying to think of a really good concrete example where you would want the forms to talk to one another. All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop since it's 7. You may find, as you're going through your senior design project, you may find an instance where there's a workflow where you may want your senior design, your final project, or your senior design, where you want. So I'm thinking of a real world scenario. I go sales, create quote. I'm now wanting to create a quote for an item that doesn't exist in inventory yet. So instead of having to close my quote or step away from my quote, I want to be able from within the quote to say, add new inventory item. So I want it to then, so I have my quote, and then I want to launch that new inventory item screen so I can add a new inventory item so I can add it to the quote. The quote form is going to want to know when the new inventory item was added so that it can then capture that inventory item that was just added and save it or add it to the row in the quote. You follow what I'm saying? You have the quote, you say, you type in your items, you drop down and go, oh, I haven't put in widget X yet into the inventory. It just came off the truck today. So I want to say add as a new item. Launches the add inventory screen, I put in widget X, $199, and I hit save. That process that we just went through is still the same process of adding the item into the inventory. Verify the name, verify the price, create an instance of the object, put it in the saved item property. This is actually somewhat irrelevant now, but then we say add item. We've now put it in the repository. It's saved, and then we close the form. How does the quote form know when that inventory item has been added? It can wire into the form close. But what if you have 3 quotes running at the same time and they're trying to wire into the form that's the child form of that quote and so forth and so on? And what I'm getting at is that you can actually create additional events off of these forms, off of any class for that matter. And you could have an event that specifically says inventory created. So then the quote form can wire into that, and then you can actually project to the quote form, here's the new inventory item that was created. And it can then take that item and add it as a row to the quote automatically. So the whole idea of user experience and making it fluid and making it part of their real work process instead of making your application clunky and difficult. Sorry, my quote's not right because I have to go and add the item, so I have to jump in here and create the inventory item and I save it. Then I have to go back and create the quote again and then add the item now that it's in the inventory. So how do you wire up that kind of experience that's smooth and fluid to the user? So as you build your application, that's always something to keep in mind is it may make sense to you, but is it smooth and fluid to the user that's supposed to actually be using it? Because at the end of the day, a programmer is not using this program. Someone that doesn't know how to program most likely is the one using it.